make sure to stay till the end of this video to find out how much Starship, SpaceX's rocket that just exploded, actually costs. Thursday, April 20th, Starship, SpaceX's rocket, the rocket that is going to go to the moon one day, finally launched a test flight. Unfortunately, it met with an explosive end over the Gulf of Mexico. What exactly happened? And even though this has happened, Elon Musk, SpaceX, does not see this as a total failure, actually sees this as a valuable learning opportunity. Let's find out a little bit more about this famous rocket, the world's most powerful rocket, Starship. Let's get into it. So you know how rockets have two parts, the big part that goes up first, and a smaller part that carries crew, astronauts and cargo. Well, in this case, the big part is the super heavy booster rockets and the small part is a Starship spacecraft. Now, normally when a rocket separates, it uses something like a machine to disconnect, and this is how Starship is different. It actually unscrews itself, sort of like twisting a bottle cap. Then it waits for something called centrifugal force to push it away from the super heavy rocket. During the recent test flight, the rocket didn't separate like it was supposed to. The part that was meant to come apart and let the spacecraft fly on its own didn't work, and so the rocket exploded instead. Now, this was actually quite unexpected because the part that didn't come apart was tested many times and it didn't fail like this. Usually when rockets don't work, it's usually because, maybe the rocket will explode mid-air or it will fly off course. But why exactly did the rocket explode? The explosion was actually deliberate. What exactly made the rocket explode and why was it deliberate? During the recent rocket launch, there were two parts of the rocket. Now, we know this already. So we know that the first part, the bigger part, that burnt up all its fuel pretty quickly, and then it was meant to separate itself from the smaller part, the part which would carry the cargo. Now, this didn't work and it wasn't able to disconnect itself. But why did it explode? When this happened, SpaceX decided to do something called explosive charges to blow up the rocket. This might actually sound crazy, but it's actually been used as a safety measure in space launches for a long time. When the explosive charges go off, they mix the liquids in the rocket, and this then explodes the rocket. And what this ends up doing is destroying the rocket and prevent it from falling to the ground and damaging property and hurting people. Even though the rocket didn't work like it was supposed to, it's still something of a big deal that the rocket even launched off the ground and reached the height that it was supposed to until it couldn't disconnect. And SpaceX sees this as a learning opportunity. Well, they will go back and think about what happened and use this to make the next rocket even better. But what does this mean for future moon missions, which rely on Starship to take us to the moon? NASA and the European Space Agency are working on a mission program called Artemis, which is going to send humans back to the moon. And Starship is one of the rockets that is going to help us get there. The other rocket is SLS, which I've spoken about in my previous videos, and a link to those videos are in the description box below. The upcoming mission, the second Artemis mission, is going to take 4 astronauts to the moon. It's going to take them on an orbit around the moon and back to Earth. And they're going to use a rocket called SLS, built by NASA, to send astronauts back to the moon. So the next mission of Artemis is going to be Artemis 2, where they're going to send 4 astronauts on an orbit around the moon. And this is going to be using the SLS, so NASA's rocket, which has been tested and successful from the Artemis 1 mission. Now, for the second part is Artemis 3. This is where they actually want to land humans back on the moon, so they step foot on our moon. And this is aimed to be by 2025, and that's where Starship comes in. So Starship is going to be the rocket that is supposed to be used to get us back on the moon. Now, yes, with the recent explosion, this might mean that SpaceX needs a little bit more time to get Starship ready for a moon landing by 2025, so it may be delayed. Now, Starship is famous for not just being a rocket that's built by SpaceX, Elon Musk's rocket, or a rocket that's going to go to the moon, but also the world's most powerful rocket. And why is this? The new rocket Starship is super strong. It has almost 7,500 tons of power to blast off into space and uses 33 of its engines at the same time. That's way more than the old rocket that the USSR made called the N1, which only had 30 engines and 4,500 tons of power. So the rocket that NASA is using right now, called SLS, is used to launch the Orion capsule for the project called Artemis. It has about 4,000 tons of power. That's not as much as Starship, but it's still pretty strong. Now, one thing SpaceX is famous for is its reusable rockets. This has changed the game in the space launching industry. Is Starship reusable? Yes, both part of the rocket is supposed to be reused for future launches. And after this launch, they plan to drop both stages of the rocket into the ocean to then be picked up and reused again for future missions. Now, they haven't tried to actually recover the first part of the rocket called Super Heavy yet, but they did test a model of the second part, which we know is Starship, a few years ago, and it went really high, almost 9 miles up, which is 15 kilometers. Then it landed safely back where it started, so they're hopeful they can do the same thing with Super Heavy boosters in the future. Now finally, how much does Starship cost? Can you guess? Back in 2019, Elon Musk said that it will cost $3 billion to make Starship, but he wants to make it cheaper by mass producing, hopefully bringing the price point down to $9 million each. Now, just as a comparison so you can understand what that price is relative to launching, it costs to make and build SLS, it costs $4 billion. So just to compare, each SLS rocket built by NASA costs $4 billion. So far, SpaceX has built 7 big rocket boosters and 24 upper units. Some of those upper units were only made to test the rocket systems and how it works with different launch sites. Others were launched to practice landing the rocket vertically. They're already working on making more. Now, NASA plans to test the lunar Starship with an unmanned flight sometime next year once. Now, when you compare this to the space race 50 years ago, the US was in a frenzy to win and actually tested the lunar module about 3 times, including twice with an astronaut on board, before the successful Apollo 11 mission. The Artemis 3 lunar landing is planned for December 2025, but experts from around the world are doubtful that this deadline will be met. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and hopefully one day I will see you in space.